A natural disaster, such as a tornado destroying a town, will have major implications on the affected community. Grief and sorrow for the lives lost, memories forever altered by the destruction of homes and businesses. But sometimes, the storm is only the beginning of the pain. Long after the tornado passes, people may take advantage of the lack of infrastructure for their own benefit. This is often seen as looting or robbery. But could someone or a group of people do something even more sinister, such as kidnap a young 4-year-old girl? What happened to Joan Gay Croft? Was she killed by a horrific F5 tornado? Or was she kidnapped in the confusion following the storm? This is the story of how Joan Gay Croft disappeared after the April 9th, 1947 Woodward, Oklahoma tornado. So a little bit of a tornado mystery in today's video. We're going to talk about the actual tornado itself, all the communities it affected, including the ones in Texas. And then we're going to talk about some of the mysteries that occurred after this tornado, because there's more than one mystery. Before we get into the video, be sure to hit subscribe for more tornado-related content. But yeah, let's get into the video. On April 9th, 1947, the morning was calm, a little bit foggy, nothing too crazy, but by the afternoon, the weather was starting to change. With an unstable atmosphere, a supercell would begin to form over West Texas. This supercell would go on to produce several tornadoes, but the tornado that would eventually go on to hit Woodward would initially start as an F2 tornado near the town of Canadian in Texas. The tornado moved northeast, passing close to a few small communities. By the time the tornado reached the town of Glazier, it was believed to be around 2 miles wide and likely an F4 or an F5 at this point. The town of Glazier would be completely destroyed and 17 would lose their lives. I mean, it literally completely destroyed the entire town. Like, look at this photo. It's a small town and the tornado was wider than the town itself. Only a few small houses remained, and here's a photo of one of them. And longtime viewers of this channel do know that I love remnants, so I actually hopped on to Google Earth and I may have found a remnant from this tornado. I'm not quite sure, but there's this little concrete pad. You can see that there's a house on it now, and it's kind of used as a driveway. But before there was a house that was just sitting there before the house, so it's been there for a long time. If you look at it on Google Street View, could be a remnant, I don't know. Alright, let's get back on topic here. The tornado would continue to the northeast, almost going directly parallel with this highway, where it would eventually hit the town of Higgins on the Oklahoma-Texas border. In Higgins, 51 lives would be lost and a significant portion of the town would be destroyed. The tornado was so powerful that even concrete from the sidewalks and streets were ripped out of the ground. The well-built brick building business district would also see heavy damage. Some notable buildings destroyed in Higgins were the Alamo Theater, where 5 had lost their lives, the Lubin and Schwab hardware store, several churches, and the pool hall. The pool hall would eventually catch on fire, claiming even more victims. After the town of Higgins, the tornado would cross into the state of Oklahoma, heading straight toward the town of Woodward, where most of the lives and destruction would take place. The tornado was still 40 miles away. However, there was one major problem. The National Federation of Telephone Workers had gone on strike 3 days earlier. This included the operators in Woodward. The strike crippled communication throughout Woodward and surrounding areas, meaning that nearby storm warnings from other communities would be unheard. Thankfully, 2 workers did remain at the switchboards for emergency purposes only. Operators Grace Nix and Bertha Wiggins were able to handle any emergency calls. One call came in from an operator in Shattuck. "It's storming out here. Are y'all alright?" With the tornado still 40 miles to the southwest, Nix and Wiggins seemed confused by the call. Everything seemed fine in Woodward. Another call from Sesto stated, "There's a dark cloud over Woodward. It looks terrible." As the tornado crept closer to the town of Woodward, more and more calls would come in, and the 2 women quickly became overwhelmed by all the lights on the switchboard. As they tried to answer the calls, suddenly disaster strikes. The 2-mile-wide tornado tears through Woodward, completely leveling both brick and wood buildings. Overall, 107 were killed and 100 city blocks were destroyed. The destruction in Woodward was catastrophic. Many residents compared it to the destroyed towns seen during World War II only a few years prior. Here's an example of a photo of the Woodward County Courthouse. Literally everything surrounding it was destroyed. Trees, buildings, everything. With all the destruction came a large amount of injuries and death. The local hospital was completely overran with victims looking for help. The hospital only had about 28 patient rooms. Those quickly filled up and victims would be forced to stay in the hallways, boiler rooms, and eventually the basement. Some of the more serious victims would also be staged at the Baker Hotel. Among the many homes within the path of the tornado was that of the Croft family. A man by the name of Hutchison Olin Croft, his wife Cleta May Croft, and their 2 daughters, 8-year-old Geraldine, and 4-year-old Joan Gay Croft. Her sister Jerry was actually Cleda's daughter from a previous marriage. The Croft family was well known and well established in their community, as Mr. Croft was a successful and well-off rancher. After the tornado destroyed their home, a neighbor, Mary Carter, ran over to aid the family, pulling out any survivors. The mother, Cleda, died instantly, while the father, Olin, was in critical condition. Joan did sustain some injuries. She reportedly had a large splinter through her calf, but reports vary on the severity of the wound. The father was rushed to the Baker Hotel as the hospital was full. Joan and her sister, meanwhile, were taken to the basement of the actual hospital. While the girls waited patiently in the dark basement of the hospital, Joan's aunt, Ruth Bond, would eventually show up. Assuming the girls were in good hands, the aunt left the hospital to search for other survivors. The next morning, Aunt Ruth would return to the hospital basement. However, only Jerry was present. When Ruth noticed that Joan Gay wasn't with her sister, she inquired with both Jerry and the nurse on what had happened to her. According to her sister, in the middle of the night, 2 men dressed in khakis, or military-style uniforms, both of whom looked like official service members, took Joan away. While the nurses and other staff members initially tried to stop the men, they insisted that they were taking Joan Gay to her family at an Oklahoma City hospital. The hospital staff believed the men, even though, according to her sister, Joan protested as she wanted to stay with her sister and see her mother. The death of her mother was unbeknownst to Joan at the time. After hearing what had happened, her aunt and the nurses quickly called all the surrounding hospitals, including those in Oklahoma City. Unfortunately, all the calls led to no evidence of her location. All the hospitals claimed that they had no indication of a Joan Gay Croft being brought there. After failing to find Joan that morning, her sister Jerry was taken to another hospital to be treated. Joan Gay's father would spend about 2 days recovering from the tornado, but once he did everything he could to find out what happened to Joan and try to track down the men who took her. In his own words from a June 1947 issue of the Daily Oklahoman, Olin was unable to begin searching for his daughters until 2 days after the recovery. Once he fully recovered, he and his father, Joan's grandfather, searched around the local towns, hanging up flyers. One example I could find was from a newspaper in Miami, Oklahoma. Olin and Joan's grandfather were unsuccessful in finding out any information about Joan's location. The search would last for months after the event. Eventually, the father would give up his search and move to San Antonio, Texas, where he would remarry. The story of Joan would eventually die down as people moved on with their lives. But every once in a while, the story would crop back up, and people would have different theories to what had happened to her. Joan's story would eventually be shown in a 1992 episode of Unsolved Mysteries. While they hoped the episode would shine some light on the disappearance, no leads would ever come up, and Joan Gay Croft is still considered missing to this day. I want to get to some of the theories of what may have happened to Joan, but before we do, I want to talk about some other mysteries from the tornado. 3 bodies, all of whom were young girls, would actually be unclaimed and unidentified from the disaster. The ages of the 3 girls were approximately 8 months, 3 to 4 years, and 12 years. The 3 to 4-year-old had reddish blonde hair while the 12-year-old had blonde hair. Some effort was made to identify the 12-year-old. Local school teachers went to the morgue to see if they recognized her. All of them said they did not recognize her. Furthermore, every 11 to 13-year-old was accounted for in Woodward. With no leads, the city decided to bury the 3 children with unmarked graves. In the 1950s, a local organization donated a grave to the youngest 8-month-old. It wouldn't be until the 80s that a local man by the name of Wayne Lawson donated markers to the other girls. Many theories exist to explain the unclaimed bodies. Most center around the idea that all 3 of them came from a poor family that lived on the outskirts of town. Some believe that the mother or father did not want to identify the girls because they didn't have the money to pay for the burial. Another theory is that it was a family just passing through at the time of the tornado. So what happened to Joan Gay Croft? Who were the men that took her in the night? Were they actual military men, or were they just pretending to be military men? Maybe her sister just made up the whole story. Let's talk about some theories and then I'll tell you what I think happened. The first question we should be asking ourselves is, did Joan Gay really survive the tornado? There are plenty of witnesses who claim to have seen her after the event. You have the neighbor who brought her, which was Mary Carter. You have the sister, Jerry, obviously. You have a couple nurses who took care of them. You have Ruth, the aunt, and then yet another neighbor, Mrs. Clyde Taylor, who also witnessed Joan at the hospital. So clearly she was there, but perhaps the splinter that was in her calf was more severe than people thought. In fact, the earliest evidence I could find about Joan's disappearance came from a newspaper article on April 20th, 1947. In this newspaper article, it claims that Joan may have potentially bled out and then was taken away from the hospital and buried during the night. The article suggests that Joan's wounds were actually worse than people thought and that she bled out while she was in the basement of the hospital. Maybe some workers took her while her sister was sleeping and she was mistakenly buried without anyone recognizing who she was. So that could be a theory. What are the theories surrounding her actually being kidnapped? Well, the first theory is that Joan was indeed kidnapped and it was with bad intentions. But then there's the possibility that maybe she was kidnapped on, I don't want to say on accident, but maybe the intentions weren't as bad as people thought. Maybe the military men grabbed her because they thought that she was a daughter of somebody else. But her sister claims that they specifically asked for Joan. So that begs the question, why did they not take her sister as well? Why did they only take her? Also, there's multiple people who took her. Usually if you have a fricked up person who wants to kidnap somebody, it's just like one individual person and everybody else is like, hey, you're crazy, you know, and they do something about it. But the fact that multiple men took her is a little bit interesting. Was it part of some conspiracy theory? Why were they all in it together? One person who never gave up the search for her was a columnist by the name of Robert E. Lee, who spent many years working as the news editor for the Woodward County Journal, the local paper. Later in his life, he would become a columnist for the Oklahoman, and in 1999, he would receive some interesting emails. All these emails came from a person who claimed to be Joan. She wrote several emails wanting to meet up with him so she can tell him more information, but she never showed up. This woman, I believe, is the same woman as Jean Smith, who later in her life claimed to be Joan. However, many were skeptical. The other thing that's interesting about Jean is that a lot of the older newspapers actually claimed her sister Jerry was named Jean. Overall, there's just many inconsistencies with this story. I mean, it was a long time ago, so that explains a lot, but it's just very strange. I couldn't find too much information about this online, and I kept getting stuck behind paywalls that I was not going to pay for. Apparently, they were able to get a DNA sample from her sister Jerry sometime later in her life, and when they compared the DNA of Jean Smith to Jerry's, the DNA strands didn't match. My theory is that she actually died in the middle of the night, and that she bled out. It's just the most logical theory, and that the people who took her were actually taking her body. I'm sure that her sister Jerry was in big time shock. I mean, I can't even imagine being in that situation. Like, my brain would be completely numb and I would be in shock, and I would probably block out a lot of the memories, and that's what I think happened. It just makes sense. That's just what I think. I mean, I don't know, I'm probably wrong. So what are your thoughts about Joan? What do you think happened to her? Let me know in the comments. I think we'll actually figure out what happens in the long run because everyone's doing the 123andMe DNA testing. And if they don't figure out anything, then it's probably pretty possible that she did die that night or sometime around that time. But I mean, it's a very tragic case. But yeah, we'll see if anything comes up in the future. And if anything does come up, I will be sure to do an update video or something like that. But yes, that is the end of the video. Thank you for watching. Be sure to subscribe for more content. Love you guys. See you later.